June 18, 1944, 3:47 a.m. Somewhere in the Norman hedgerows, asterisk, Lieutenant Colonel Clifford Simensen crouches behind a canvas wall that's barely thicker than a bedsheet. Around him, scattered across 2 square miles of French farmland, sits what appears to be an entire armored division. Sherman tanks, half-tracks, artillery pieces, supply trucks, over 1,000 vehicles in total. The kind of force that could punch through the German line and change the course of the war, except none of it is real. The Sherman tank 3 feet from Simensen's position weighs 65 pounds. The actual M4 Sherman weighs 66,800 pounds, 1,000 times heavier. His tank is made of inflatable rubber draped over a collapsible frame, held down by tent stakes. An air compressor keeps it upright. If a German patrol stumbles into this position, a single bayonet thrust will deflate the entire deception in seconds. And yet, across the channel, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel is repositioning 3 Panzer divisions, over 40,000 real soldiers with real tanks, because he believes Simensen's rubber army is the main Allied invasion force preparing to strike at Pas-de-Calais. By June 1944, the Allied invasion of Europe hung by a thread thinner than anyone publicly admitted. The D-Day landings at Normandy on June 6 had succeeded, barely, with over 10,000 casualties in the first 24 hours. But the Nazis controlled nearly all of continental Europe, and they had the defensive advantage. Hitler's Atlantic Wall stretched from Norway to Spain, 2,400 miles of bunkers, minefields, and artillery positions. Behind it waited 58 German divisions, including 10 elite Panzer divisions with over 1,500 tanks. The mastermind orchestrating Germany's defense was Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, one of Hitler's most experienced commanders. His strategy was brutally simple. Identify where the main Allied thrust would come, concentrate overwhelming force at that point, and drive the invaders back into sea before they could establish a beachhead. German intelligence had correctly identified 2 possible invasion sites, Normandy and Pas-de-Calais. Pas-de-Calais was the obvious choice. It was the shortest distance across the channel, only 21 miles from Dover. Every military logic pointed to Calais. The Allies knew this. They also knew that if the Germans moved their reserves to Normandy too quickly, the invasion would be crushed. Eisenhower's forces were landing approximately 156,000 men on D-Day, but the Wehrmacht could move 200,000 troops to Normandy within a week if they chose. The math was simple and terrifying. Whoever concentrated force faster would win, and the Germans had interior lines and better roads. Standard Allied deception operations weren't working. The British had tried double agents, fake radio traffic, and falsified documents. Some of it worked. Operation Fortitude had convinced Hitler that General George S. Patton commanded a fictional First U.S. Army group preparing to invade Calais. But the Germans were skeptical. They'd been lied to before. Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights were still probing the English coast, and German intelligence was analyzing every radio transmission, every supply shipment, every troop movement. The casualty projections were staggering. If German intelligence saw through the deception and moved their Panzer reserves to Normandy, Allied planners' estimated losses could exceed 50,000 men in the first week. The invasion could fail entirely. Churchill privately told his chiefs of staff he expected the beaches to run red with blood of American and British youth. One intelligence officer calculated that for every hour the Germans believed Patton's fake army was real, 500 Allied soldiers stayed alive. Lieutenant Colonel Clifford Simensen wasn't supposed to be in France at all. 6 months earlier, he'd been an industrial designer in New York, creating window displays for department stores. Before the war, he'd made his living making papier-mâché mannequins look like real people from 20 feet away. The Army had drafted him in 1943, taken one look at his resume, and assigned him to a unit so secret it didn't have an official name. They called themselves the Ghost Army. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops was an experiment. Could artists, designers, actors, and sound engineers fool the German army? The unit included fashion designers from 7th Avenue, painters from art schools, radio actors, and stage magicians. The Army gave them inflatable tanks manufactured by Goodyear, the tire company. The same factories that made barrage balloons now produce fake Shermans. Each rubber tank cost $85.50, about 1/1000 the cost of a real tank. They could be inflated in 5 minutes using air compressors mounted in trucks. But inflatable tanks alone weren't enough. German reconnaissance pilots weren't idiots. They'd spot obvious fakes. Simensen's innovation was to create an entire theatrical production. His team didn't just set up fake tanks. They created a complete illusion of an armored division preparing for combat. They studied how real tank units behaved. When a Sherman company moved into position, it left tread marks in the mud. So Simensen's men drove trucks with fake treads welded to the axles, creating realistic track patterns in the dirt. Real tank crews hung their laundry on the vehicles. So the Ghost Army hung wet uniforms on their rubber Shermans. Real units had MPs directing traffic at crossroads. The Ghost Army posted fake MPs who would theatrically wave at the sky whenever they heard aircraft engines. The most audacious element was sound. Simensen's unit included sound engineers from Hollywood who'd worked on movie studio recordings. They recorded actual tank battalions, the clanking of treads, the rumble of engines, the grinding of gears, and pressed recordings onto massive 500-pound sound systems. These sonic deception units could project the sound of 100 tanks moving through forest roads, audible for 15 miles. The deception extended to the towns nearby. Ghost Army soldiers would walk into French cafes in full view of potential informants and loudly discuss their unit, carefully mentioning the wrong division numbers. They'd scatter fake shoulder patches in latrines. They'd send fake radio traffic, using the real call signs of armored divisions that were actually 200 miles away. It was completely unauthorized in the traditional sense. No formal military doctrine covered theatrical deception using inflatable equipment. If it failed, Simensen and his commanders faced court-martial for wasting resources and endangering men. If it worked, the Army would deny the unit ever existed to preserve operational security. Simensen named his first major operation Elephant, the target, convinced the Germans that the 2nd Armored Division was positioned near Brest when it was actually moving toward Paris. June 22, 1944, 11:30 p.m. Near Brest, France. Simensen's convoy of trucks rolled through the darkness with headlights off, navigating by moonlight. Each truck carried 4 men in 2 deflated tanks. The real 2nd Armored Division had pulled out 18 hours earlier, racing east to support the Normandy breakout. Simensen had 18 hours to make the Germans believe those 10,000 men and 300 real tanks were still in position. His team worked with desperate speed. Unload the bundles of rubber and canvas. Unfold the frames. Connect the air hoses. The compressors coughed to life, sounding obscenely loud in the night. One by one, the Sherman tanks inflated, rising from flat canvas to 3-dimensional shapes in 4 minutes each. In the darkness, from 50 yards away, they looked perfect. Up close, in daylight, they looked like props from a high school play. 2 men could lift an inflatable Sherman. The real version required a 30-ton tank transporter. Simensen watched the soldiers manhandle a tank into position, then anchor it with tent stakes driven into the soft French earth. If the wind picked up, the entire deception could blow away like a circus tent. By 4 a.m., they had 112 tanks in position, arranged in the exact formation the real 2nd Armored had used. As dawn broke, Simensen's sound trucks began playing the recordings of idling tank engines. The noise rolled across the countryside. The deep, throaty rumble of Sherman engines warming up, the metallic clink of treads, the occasional rev of a powerful motor. At 6:15 a.m., a Luftwaffe Focke-Wulf FW-189 reconnaissance plane appeared from the north, flying at 8,000 feet. Simensen's radio man immediately broadcast false tank-to-headquarters chatter on known German listening frequencies. Baker Company reports all vehicles operational, requests resupply of fuel and ammunition. The FW-189 made 3 passes, its pilot photographing the position. Simensen stood motionless, forcing himself not to look up. The inflatable tanks had no working guns, no engines, no crews. If the German pilot descended below 1,000 feet, he'd see men standing inside the rubber hulls, holding up the gun barrels with wooden poles. The plane completed its reconnaissance run and turned north. Simensen exhaled. 36 hours later, Allied intelligence intercepted German radio traffic. Wehrmacht headquarters reported that the 2nd Armored Division remained in the Brest sector, showing no signs of movement. The German 2nd Parachute Division, 15,000 elite troops, remained pinned down watching Simensen's rubber tanks instead of moving east to block the real American advance. The impossible had happened. The Ghost Army's first operation had worked, but success brought a new problem. The Germans were now actively monitoring the fake 2nd Armored Division. If the illusion collapsed, if a patrol stumbled into the position and discovered the deception, every future Ghost Army operation would be compromised. The Germans would stop believing their reconnaissance photos. They'd stop trusting their intelligence reports. And thousands of Allied soldiers would die when German reserves appeared in unexpected positions. Simensen radioed headquarters. "We've poked the hornet's nest. Now we have to keep them believing." The FW-189 returned the next morning, this time with 2 Bf-109 fighter escorts. The Germans were taking the threat seriously. Simensen's team scrambled to add more details. Fresh track marks in the mud, more laundry hanging from the fake tanks, a field kitchen with actual fires cooking. They ate the food themselves. Every 6 hours, they repositioned a few tanks to simulate normal unit movement. On the 4th night, disaster nearly struck. A strong wind came up, gusting to 30 miles per hour. 2 inflatable Shermans broke free from their stakes and tumbled across the field like beach balls. Simensen's team chased them down in the darkness, wrestling the 65-pound canvas shapes back into position and driving additional stakes to hold them down. If German artillery observers had been watching with night vision equipment, they would have seen tanks bouncing across the landscape, but they didn't. The deception held, and the real 2nd Armored Division, now 150 miles away, punched through German lines and captured a critical road junction unopposed. July 14, 1944. Ghost Army headquarters, somewhere in Normandy, ****. The success of Operation Elephant changed everything. Within 2 weeks, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops received orders directly from General Omar Bradley's headquarters. Mounted deception to cover the entire 3rd Army's movement into Brittany. Not a single division, an entire field army. Over 200,000 men. This was Simensen's ultimate test. The Ghost Army had 1,100 men total. They had to simulate 200,000. The scale seemed impossible until Simensen realized something crucial. The Germans didn't need to believe in 200,000 individual soldiers. They needed to believe in the signature of a field army, the radio traffic, the supply convoys, the command structure. Operation Brittany began on July 25th. While General George Patton's real 3rd Army attacked south, the Ghost Army created a phantom 3rd Army attacking west. They deployed every asset simultaneously. 600 inflatable vehicles, tanks, artillery, trucks, 20 sonic deception units playing recordings of armored columns 24 hours a day, and 140 radio operators sending fake traffic on 19 different frequencies. The radio deception was the most sophisticated element. The Ghost Army Signal Company had broken down the communication patterns of a real field army into mathematical components. How many messages per hour? What types of codes? Which units communicated with which other units? They created a completely fictional command structure, fake divisions with fake commanding officers, and brought them to life through radio waves. For authenticity, they recruited real officers to play fake generals. Colonel John W. Rattay, a logistics officer, spent 2 weeks pretending to be Major General Edward Brooks, commanding a fictional 15 Corps. He'd call field units using Brooks's actual call sign and bark orders about supply requisitions and unit movements. All completely fake, all completely convincing to German signals intelligence. From the German perspective, chaos erupted at Wehrmacht intelligence headquarters in Paris. Analysts stare at reconnaissance photos and radio intercept reports that contradicted each other. Photos showed Patton's 3rd Army positioned near Brest. Radio traffic indicated the 3rd Army was moving south toward the Loire Valley. Aerial reconnaissance spotted tank concentrations that hadn't been there 12 hours earlier. French resistance reports mention American convoys moving in 3 different directions simultaneously. Colonel Friedrich August Freiherr von der Heydt, German intelligence chief of the Western Front, wrote in his July 29th report, "Enemy dispositions remain unclear. Multiple contradictory indicators suggest either unprecedented mobility or deliberate deception. Recommend withholding reserves until situation clarifies." That single recommendation, withholding reserves, was exactly what Eisenhower needed. For 8 critical days, German panzer divisions sat immobile, waiting for clarity that never came. By the time von der Heydt realized he was chasing ghosts, Patton's real Third Army had advanced 75 miles and trapped 100,000 German soldiers in the Falaise pocket. But the Ghost Army's success came at a price. The more realistic their deceptions became, the more danger they faced. German artillery began targeting the fake concentrations. On August 2nd, a barrage of 88mm shells hit one of the Ghost Army's positions near Avranches. 6 men were killed, not by direct hits, but by shrapnel while they were inflating rubber tanks. The irony was brutal. They died creating a lie to save others. Simensen attended the memorial service for the 6 men. No records could be made. The Ghost Army didn't officially exist. The men's families would receive telegrams saying their sons died in support of combat operations in France. Nothing more. The night after the funeral, Simensen sat in his command tent reviewing reconnaissance photos taken by U.S. aircraft of their own positions. The inflatable tanks looked convincing, but he could see flaws. Shadows fell wrong, because the rubber hulls weren't as tall as real tanks. The track marks were too uniform, because they used the same truck to create all of them. He called his officers together. "We're getting sloppy. The Germans haven't noticed yet, but they will. We need up our game." The Ghost Army began adding random imperfections, intentional mistakes that made the deception more believable. They'd leave one tank slightly askew, as if a careless crew had parked it poorly. They'd damage one inflatable vehicle by putting scorch marks on the rubber, simulating battle damage. They started varying the sounds, mixing in recordings of engines that wouldn't start, transmissions that ground and failed, the normal mechanical failures of a real armored unit. The Germans took the bait deeper. Wehrmacht reports from August 1944 describe Allied tank units as mechanically unreliable but numerous, indicating American production capacity continues to exceed estimates. They were analyzing the fake mechanical problems as intelligence about U.S. industrial output. September 13, 1944, 2:17 a.m. Near Wallendorf, Germany, ***. The radio call that woke Simensen was frantic. "Ghost 6, this is Baker Actual. We have a situation. The 28th Infantry Division is about to walk into an ambush. They think they're facing a company of rear guard troops. It's an entire SS Panzer division. Over. The U.S. 28th Infantry, the Bloody Bucket Division, 15,000 men, was advancing toward the Siegfried Line, Hitler's fortified border defense. Allied intelligence had reported light resistance ahead, but an intercepted German radio transmission, decoded 2 hours earlier, revealed the truth. The 2nd SS Panzer Division, 18,000 men with over 100 tanks, was dug in and waiting. The 28th Infantry was walking into a killing field. The solution seemed impossible. The Ghost Army was 40 miles away. They had no combat capability. Their weapons were rubber and canvas. But they had radios, they had sound trucks, and they had trucks with inflatable tanks. Simensen made a decision that violated every safety protocol in the book. "Mount up. We're going in." At 3:45 a.m., the Ghost Army convoy raced north through the darkness. 83 trucks carrying deflated equipment and sound systems. They had one objective: create a phantom armored force threatening the German flank, forcing the 2nd SS Panzer to divert forces away from the ambush site. By 5:30 a.m., they'd reached a position 3 miles east of the German line, dangerously close. They could hear the SS Panzer units warming their engines in the pre-dawn darkness. If a German patrol investigated the sounds of truck engines and air compressors, the Ghost Army would be massacred. They worked with reckless speed. Inflatable Shermans rose from the ground every 3 minutes. The sound trucks positioned themselves on ridgelines where the audio would carry farthest. At 6:15 a.m., as the sun broke the horizon, Simensen gave the order, "All sonic units, begin playback. All radio operators, begin transmission. Make them think we're the entire 6th Armored Division." The sound of 150 tanks rolled across the German positions like thunder. The Ghost Army's radios flooded German listening frequencies with urgent traffic. Fox Company reports contact with enemy armor. Baker Company is moving to flank. Request immediate artillery support on coordinates. From the German perspective, a massive American armored force had appeared on their eastern flank overnight, precisely where their intelligence said there were no Allied units within 50 miles. In the 2nd SS Panzer Division command post, Major General Heinz Lammerding faced an impossible decision. His orders were to annihilate the 28th Infantry Division advancing from the west. But now a larger American force threatened to cut off his entire division from behind. If he stayed in position, he'd be surrounded. If he withdrew, he'd let the 28th Infantry escape. At 7:43 a.m., Lammerding made his choice. He ordered his division to disengage from the 28th Infantry and reposition to meet the new threat from the east, which didn't exist. As German Panther tanks and half-tracks began moving toward the Ghost Army's position, Simensen faced his own crisis. The 2nd SS Panzer Division was coming straight at them. In 30 minutes, German forces would overrun the Ghost Army's position and discover hundreds of inflatable tanks anchored to the ground with tent stakes. "Start deflating. Prep for emergency evac," Simensen ordered. His men raced between the rubber vehicles, shutting off compressors and pulling stakes. The inflatable Shermans collapsed like punctured balloons. Crews shoved the bundles of canvas into trucks. The sound unit shut down mid-recording, cutting off the Phantom tank noises abruptly. At 8:22 a.m., with German reconnaissance elements less than 2 miles away, the last Ghost Army truck pulled out. They left behind fresh track marks, abandoned equipment, intentionally, and radio transmitters still broadcasting on automatic timers. The Germans reached the position at 9:05 a.m. They found an abandoned American tank assembly area. The track marks were real. The scattered equipment was real. The radio transmitters were real and still functioning. But the tanks themselves were gone, apparently having displaced rapidly to a new position. To the Germans, it looked exactly like an American armored unit conducting mobile warfare. Hit, displace, set up in a new location. They'd been trained to expect this. American armor was known for rapid redeployment. The 2nd SS Panzer Division spent the next 6 hours searching for the 6th Armored Division. That didn't exist. Meanwhile, the 28th Infantry Division, instead of walking into an ambush, found German positions abandoned. They advanced 12 miles unopposed and captured a critical crossing over the Aar River. Simensen's radio crackled at 3 p.m. "Ghost 6, this is Baker Actual. You magnificent bastards. The 28th is across the river. Estimate you saved 3,000 casualties today. Over. The cost: 2 Ghost Army trucks damaged by German artillery fire, 7 men wounded, 0 dead. The gain: an entire American division saved from annihilation and a strategic position captured. But there was a deeper consequence. The Ghost Army had now operated within direct contact range of elite German forces. The risk had escalated beyond deception into something closer to combat. They'd crossed a line. That night, Simensen wrote in his unofficial diary, "All Ghost Army activities were classified. We're not actors anymore. We're bait. We draw the enemy toward us, knowing that if they get too close, we have no way to defend ourselves. Every operation is a gamble that we can maintain the illusion long enough to escape before they discover we're smoke and mirrors." The Ghost Army's arsenal was as much theatrical as military, a bizarre fusion of industrial design, audio engineering, and psychological warfare. Understanding how they fooled the Wehrmacht requires examining the technology in granular detail. The inflatable tanks, engineering deception. Each M4 Sherman decoy, manufactured by Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, consisted of a rubberized canvas envelope inflated by a portable air compressor. The frame was collapsible tubular steel, similar to circus tent poles. Fully inflated dimensions matched the real Sherman exactly. 19 feet 4 inches long, 8 feet 7 inches wide, 9 feet tall. Weight, 65 pounds versus the real Sherman's 66,800 pounds. The materials were specifically chosen. Natural rubber alone would look too uniform and shiny in reconnaissance photos. The Ghost Army used a canvas outer layer painted with standard U.S. Army olive drab mixed with lampblack to match weathered armor plating. They applied the paint unevenly, creating streaks and wear patterns identical to real combat vehicles. The critical vulnerability was wind. An inflatable Sherman could withstand 20 miles per hour winds when properly staked, but gusts above 30 miles per hour would collapse or detach them. The solution was a ground anchor system using 18-inch steel stakes, the same stakes used for large military tents. Each tank required 12 stakes positioned at stress points identified through wind tunnel testing at Wright Field, Ohio. Goodyear manufactured 619 inflatable vehicles total, 179 Sherman tanks, 94 M7 pre-self-propelled artillery, 102 half-tracks, 89 Jeeps, 78 2.5-ton trucks, and 77 105mm howitzers. Production cost per unit ranged from $85.50 Sherman to $18.50 Jeep. A real Sherman cost $44,500 in 1944 dollars, 522 times more expensive than the fake version. Sonic deception, the sound of armor. The Ghost Army's 3,132nd Signal Service Company Special operated what were essentially mobile sound studios. Each sonic unit consisted of custom-built 500-pound speakers mounted on half-tracks, wire recorders predecessor to tape with 15-minute loops, 1,000-watt amplifiers powered by truck-mounted generators, directional baffles to aim sound toward enemy positions. The recordings were made at the Army Experimental Station at Fort Knox, Kentucky. Sound engineers captured actual M4 Sherman battalions conducting maneuvers. Engine starts, idling, acceleration, deceleration, gear changes, tread clanking, turret rotation motors. They recorded at multiple distances and angles to create a library of sounds. The recordings were surprisingly complex. A Sherman tank idling produces sound at 82 decibels at 50 feet. With a frequency signature between 20 Hz and 200 Hz, a deep rumble that carries for miles. The tread clank is higher frequency, 400 to 800 Hz, creating a rhythmic metallic percussion. Combined, these sounds create an unmistakable acoustic signature. The Ghost Army discovered that realistic playback required accounting for terrain. Sound in dense forest propagates differently than in open farmland. They developed a formula. Multiply playback volume by 1.4 in forests to compensate for absorption by trees, reduce by 0.7 in open plains to prevent unrealistic overpropagation. Effective range was extraordinary. Under optimal atmospheric conditions, temperature inversion at night, still air, the sonic units could project the sound of tank battalion 15 miles. German forces reported hearing American armor throughout the night during Ghost Army operations, contributing to perception that U.S. forces had overwhelming numerical superiority and conducted 24-hour operations. Radio deception, creating a phantom command structure. The Ghost Army Signal Company operated the most sophisticated element, fake radio nets that simulated entire division command structures. They studied actual U.S. Army communications protocols down to the individual operators, keying patterns on Morse code, the FIS, that identified specific radio operators. Each U.S. Armored Division generated approximately 1,400 radio transmissions per day across multiple frequencies. The Ghost Army had to replicate this volume and complexity with only 140 operators. They used automation, pre-recorded Morse code loops for routine traffic, logistics, supply requests, maintenance reports, and live operators for command traffic that might be monitored by German intelligence. The sophistication went beyond volume. The Ghost Army created fictional officers with believable backstories. Colonel John Mitchell, commanding the fake 79th Infantry Division, had a hometown, Cleveland, a pre-war occupation, lawyer, and a communication style, formal, terse, consistent across all transmissions. German intelligence compiled dossiers on these fictional officers. The radio operators also made intentional mistakes. Real military radio discipline breaks down under combat stress. The Ghost Army would occasionally transmit in the clear, unencrypted, during simulated emergencies, allowing German listeners to intercept plausible intelligence. One stage transmission. Baker Company is being overrun. Require immediate cut off mid-sentence. German intelligence reported this as evidence of a fierce engagement, when in reality it was two actors performing in a radio tent. Why it worked. The psychology of intelligence analysis. The Ghost Army success rested on a fundamental truth about military intelligence. Analysts expect the evidence to be incomplete and contradictory. Modern warfare generates fog and friction. Intelligence officers are trained to piece together fragmentary reports into coherent assessments. The Ghost Army fed the German intelligence machine exactly what it expected. Reconnaissance photos showing tank concentrations, radio intercepts indicating command structures, sound detection reports confirming armor movement, French civilian reports of American troops. Each piece of evidence corroborated the others. The Germans weren't being foolish. They were being systematic. The Ghost Army had simply manufactured a systematic lie. The Ghost Army's operations had ripple effects far beyond the immediate tactical engagements. Their deceptions functioned like a lever, moving German forces away from critical positions at precisely the moments when Allied commanders needed breathing room. Operation Fearsen. The most successful deception, In March 1945, as the Allies prepared to cross the Rhine River at Remagen, the Ghost Army mounted Operation Fearsen, their most ambitious deception. They simulated the U.S. Ninth Army preparing to cross the Rhine 30 miles north of the actual crossing site. Over 9 days, the Ghost Army created the signature of 40,000 troops massing for assault. Radio traffic tripled. Sonic units ran continuously, and over 400 inflatable vehicles appeared in assembly areas visible to German observers across the river. They even constructed fake landing craft, plywood frames with canvas sides, positioned on riverbanks as if preparing for an amphibious assault. German commanders took the bait completely. General Johannes Blaskowitz, commanding Army Group H, repositioned the 176th and 183rd Volksgrenadier Divisions, 23,000 men, to defend against the Phantom Ninth Army's crossing. These troops were not present when the rail crossing occurred at Remagen. The result: the 9th Armored Division captured the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen intact, the first Allied crossing of the Rhine. German forces were out of position to counterattack effectively. Historians estimate Operation Fearsen saved between 10,000 and 15,000 Allied casualties by dispersing German defensive forces. The German perspective. When did they know? Remarkably, German intelligence didn't discover the Ghost Army's activities until after the war ended. Captured Wehrmacht documents from 1945 showed German analysts were still tracking U.S. 6th Armored Division, a completely fictional unit the Ghost Army had created, as a real threat. In May 1945, as Germany collapsed, Allied intelligence teams captured German intelligence archives. One file contained reconnaissance photos of Ghost Army positions with German annotations. Estimated enemy strength, 12,000 men, 200 tanks. High-priority target for Luftwaffe Bomber Command. The Luftwaffe had wasted sorties bombing inflatable tanks. Colonel Friedrich August Freiherr von der Heydt, the German intelligence officer who'd analyzed Ghost Army operations throughout 1944, was interrogated by U.S. forces in June 1945. When shown photos of inflatable tanks, he reportedly said, "This explains so much. We consistently overestimated your armored strength. Our projections showed you had 50% more tanks than your industrial production could possibly deliver. We assumed you were receiving Soviet Lend-Lease tanks we hadn't accounted for." The Ghost Army had accidentally convinced the Germans that Allied tank production was even higher than it actually was, affecting German strategic planning at the highest levels. Doctrine changes, the birth of deception warfare. The Ghost Army's success forced a fundamental rethinking of military deception. Before 1944, Deception was considered a sideshow, useful but not decisive. The Ghost Army proved that deception, properly executed, could shape enemy strategy at the theater level. Post-war, the U.S. Army established a Studies and Observations Group, SAG, to incorporate deception into standard doctrine. The Ghost Army's techniques became classified training materials. Subsequent conflicts, Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, all feature deception units directly descended from the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. The Soviets, after learning about the Ghost Army through intelligence channels, created their own Maskirovka deception doctrine, which became a cornerstone of Soviet military theory. During the Cold War, both NATO and Warsaw Pact forces deployed inflatable decoys, electronic spoofing, and sonic deception as standard practice. Ironically, the Ghost Army's greatest contribution was making deception respectable. Before 1944, career officers viewed deception as ungentlemanly or beneath the dignity of conventional warfare. After the Ghost Army's documented success, deception became a legitimate operational art, taught at staff colleges and incorporated into war planning. The costs in lives, calculating the impossible. Quantifying how many lives the Ghost Army saved is mathematically impossible, but military historians have attempted estimates using German casualty ratios and operational analyses. The consensus, by diverting German forces from actual Allied positions, the Ghost Army's 21 major operations likely prevented between 15,000 and 30,000 Allied casualties. The math is based on German operational effectiveness. When the Wehrmacht concentrated forces at actual Allied positions, casualty rates averaged 12 to 18% among Allied assault units. When German forces were dispersed or out of position, casualty rates dropped to 3 to 7%. The difference, the casualties that didn't happen, can be partially attributed to the Ghost Army's successful deceptions. One documented example. At the Battle of Brest, the real 2nd Armored Division advanced against German positions that had been stripped of reserves because those reserves were watching Ghost Army inflatables 40 miles away. The 2nd Armored suffered 147 casualties, taking objectives that pre-battle planning had estimated would cost 800 to 1,200 casualties. The difference, approximately 700 men who went home alive instead of being killed or wounded. Multiply that across 21 operations over 11 months, and the Ghost Army's impact becomes clear. They save lives by making the enemy look in the wrong direction at the critical moment. Lieutenant Colonel Clifford Simensen survived the war and returned to New York. He resumed his career in industrial design, never speaking publicly about his wartime service. The Ghost Army remained classified until 1996. He died in 1988 at age 79, having spent 43 years keeping the secret. Many Ghost Army veterans became prominent artists. Bill Blass, one of the unit's designers, became a world-famous fashion designer. Ellsworth Kelly became one of America's most celebrated abstract painters. Arthur Singer painted wildlife illustrations for the U.S. Postal Service. They shared a common trait. They'd learned to see warfare as a problem of perception, and that skill translated into peacetime art. The Ghost Army soldiers received remarkably few decorations during the war, by design. Awarding medals would have drawn attention to a unit that officially didn't exist. After declassification, in 1996, the U.S. Army rectified this. In 2013, Congress authorized a Congressional Gold Medal for the Ghost Army, one of the highest civilian honors. The ceremony included 10 surviving veterans, then in their 90s, finally receiving recognition for their service. As for the machines themselves, the inflatable tanks were supposed to be destroyed after the war. Military regulations required burning all classified equipment, but several Ghost Army veterans couldn't bear to destroy the tanks that had saved so many lives. They smuggled inflatables home as personal souvenirs. In 2014, a Connecticut man cleaning out his late father's barn discovered an inflatable Sherman tank, still in its original canvas bag. The father had been a Ghost Army veteran who'd kept it hidden for 69 years. The Smithsonian Institution now displays that tank in the National Museum of American History. Another inflatable Sherman was rediscovered in 2018 in a storage unit in New Jersey. A ghost Army veteran had kept it, intending to donate it to a museum but had passed away before doing so. The tank was fully functional. When inflated, it looked exactly as it had in 1944. Museum conservators noted the painted canvas showed where patterns identical to real Sherman tanks, evidence of the meticulous attention to detail that made the deception work. The sonic equipment met a different fate. The massive speakers and wire recorders were scrapped as obsolete technology by 1946. Only one sound recording system survived, kept by a veteran who'd been a sound engineer. In 2009, that equipment was donated to the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, where it was restored to working condition. Museum visitors can hear the exact sounds that fooled the Wehrmacht, the rumble of Sherman tanks that never existed, played from 80-year-old wire recordings. As for the German commanders, their fates were mixed. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, whose forces a ghost army deceived repeatedly, was captured by U.S. forces in May 1945. During interrogations, he expressed bafflement at Allied tank numbers. "Your logistics were impossible. You moved armor faster than our intelligence could track. We assumed you had twice as many divisions as you actually possessed." He never learned he'd been fighting ghosts. Major General Heinz Lammerding, the SS officer who diverted his Panzer division to chase ghost army inflatables, survived the war but faced prosecution for war crimes unrelated to his encounters with the ghost army. He died in 1971, never knowing that the 6th Armored Division that had threatened his flank in September 1944 was 83 trucks carrying rubber balloons. Perhaps the most poignant fate belongs to the 6 Ghost Army soldiers killed by German artillery while inflating rubber tanks on August 2, 1944. For 52 years, their families didn't know how they died, only that they'd been killed in France during support operations. After declassification in 1996, the families finally learned the truth. Their sons, brothers, and fathers had died maintaining a deception that saved thousands. In 2017, the Ghost Army veterans established a memorial fund to honor those 6 men. The memorial at Arlington National Cemetery includes a plaque with their names and a simple inscription: "They fought with illusion so others might live with truth." The Ghost Army story is fundamentally about the gap between appearance and reality, and how that gap can be weaponized by the clever against the strong. 1,100 artists, actors, and engineers took on the Wehrmacht, the most powerful military machine in Europe, armed with rubber balloons, speakers, and radios. And they won. Their success came from understanding a deep truth. In warfare, perception shapes reality. If the enemy believes you're strong where you're weak, that belief becomes operationally real. The Germans repositioned divisions, allocated resources, and made strategic decisions based on the Ghost Army's illusions. Those decisions had real consequences. Battles won, soldiers saved, territory captured. But the Ghost Army also represents something more universal. They were civilians in uniform, men whose pre-war skills made them useless in conventional combat, but invaluable in unconventional warfare. The Army could have sent them to infantry companies where they'd have been mediocre soldiers. Instead, commanders recognized their unique talents and turned artists into warriors of a different kind. There's courage in their story, but it's not the conventional courage of charging a machine gun nest. It's the courage of standing in a field, unarmed, inflating a rubber tank, while German artillery finds a range. It's the courage of being bait, knowing that if the deception fails, you have no defense. It's the courage of spending 11 months creating illusions so detailed, so convincing, that they change the course of history, and then going home and never speaking about it, because your government requires silence. The Ghost Army defeated the Wehrmacht with creativity, precision, and an artist's understanding that reality is partly perception. They prove that in warfare, as an art, the most powerful weapon isn't always the heaviest gun. Sometimes it's the most convincing lie. If this story moved you, if you're amazed that 1,000 men with inflatable tanks helped win World War II, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube's algorithm that weird, true stories from history deserve as much attention as clickbait. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because we're diving deep into history's most unbelievable true stories. The battles that shouldn't have been won, the technologies that shouldn't have worked, the people who changed the world by breaking every rule. Next week's video is about the U.S. Navy submarine that sank a train. Yes, a train on land with torpedoes. And somehow that's not even the craziest part of the story. Drop a comment right now and tell us, what historical deception or trick operation should we cover next? Write your suggestion, tell us where you're watching from, and let us know if you'd heard of the Ghost Army before this video. The most liked comment will help choose our next deep dive. Thank you for watching. Thank you for making sure Lieutenant Colonel Clifford Simensen, the 6 men who died maintaining the illusion, and the 1,100 artists who fought with rubber and canvas don't disappear into silence. Their story deserves to be remembered, not because they killed the enemy, but because they saved their friends by making the enemy chase shadows. And one more thing. If you want to learn more about the Ghost Army, Rick Bayer's book, The Ghost Army of World War II, is a definitive account written with access to declassified documents and interviews with surviving veterans. We'll put a link in the description. Every purchase supports historical preservation efforts and ensures these stories stay alive. Now go watch that submarine versus train video in the suggested videos. You won't believe what happens when a Navy commander decides railroads are legitimate naval targets.